A tale of love, lies, videotape, and
Charged with premeditated murder, kidnapping, and poisoning.
an explosive teenage love triangle that started in high school.
We'd go out, we'd go on dates, we texted all
And
the time.
found so far. Police were frustrated when they were discussing this at the news conference. They're asking the people in the Gainesville area to point out anything that might be suspicious to them.
On November 16, 1993, Christian Aguilar Gallego was born in Doral, Florida, the son of Colombian immigrants who, in search of a better future, had left Cali to settle in the United States. Carlos Aguilar and Claudia Gallego worked hard to provide Christian and his younger brother Alexander with a peaceful life full of opportunities. Christian was an introverted young man, always standing out for his kindness and dedication to his studies. He loved reading and making others laugh, quickly becoming an exemplary student and the president of the reading club at Doral Academy. However, the life of this promising young man would change forever when he crossed paths with Pedro Bravo, a friend whose fate would intertwine with Christian's in a dark story of jealousy, obsession, and murder. Pedro Bravo, like Christian, had Latin roots and shared a close friendship with him during their high school years. However, despite his charisma and sense of humor, Pedro hid a more complex and troubled personality, which worsened after the end of his relationship with Erica Freemanks, who was also a friend of both. Erica had been Pedro's girlfriend for almost 3 years, but in May 2012, right after graduating, she decided to end the relationship.
What month did you get here?
July,
And when did Christian come?
I think in the end of June, the 26th or the...
When in July do you think that you and Christian had some kind of verbal discussion that y'all wanted to
be together.
kind of be together? Yeah. Do you remember?
It was early. It was like maybe July 2nd or July
Okay.
3rd. I remember like...
You were here in Gainesville when you had that?
Yeah.
Okay. When did you finally sever your relationship with Pedro? What month was that?
That was late June. I felt like he was very like, after I did break up with him, he was very possessive. Like he was very like, I want this and I want this. Like it was kind of like, I don't care what you're feeling right now. Like I want to be with you, and nothing else is gonna matter. Like nothing else. I felt that possessive kind of thing.
What seemed like a natural decision for Erica after moving to Gainesville to continue her studies, knowing it was impossible to maintain a long-distance relationship for Pedro, it was the trigger for a dark plan. Unable to accept the end of his relationship with Erica, Pedro decided to follow her to Gainesville, where Christian was also beginning his studies at the University of Florida on a biomedical engineering scholarship. Unbeknownst to Pedro, Christian and Erica had started a romantic relationship. This new couple decided to keep their romance a secret to avoid conflict, but when Pedro discovered the truth, his world fell apart. With a calculated and obsessive plan, Pedro detailed in his personal diary how he would win Erica back. His initial strategy? Move to Gainesville, get close to Erica again, and start afresh. However, his obsession soon led him down a darker path. Using social media, Pedro managed to access Erica's photos, even though she had removed him from all her networks to cut ties. However, Pedro saw something that shattered him. Photos of Christian and Erica together as a beautiful couple. This discovery enraged him further, and from that moment, Pedro's mind was consumed with thoughts of revenge. On September 20th, 2012, Pedro contacted Christian, claiming he was going through deep depression and considering suicide. Despite the reservations Christian had about his old friendship with Pedro, especially now that he was dating his ex-girlfriend, he decided to help him. The empathy Christian always showed towards others prevented him from leaving Pedro alone at such a critical time. That day, Christian mentioned to Erica that he would be meeting with Pedro to try and help him. However, he could never have imagined that this meeting would be his last. That night, as Erica waited for Christian in her apartment, she began to worry when she received no news from him. Hours passed, and her concern turned into fear. By the early hours of the morning, with still no news, Erica decided to contact Pedro, who was not answering her calls. After several attempts, Pedro finally responded evasively, claiming that he had argued with Christian, but they had parted ways. Worried, Erica practically forced Pedro to accompany her to the campus police to report her boyfriend's disappearance. The police immediately began investigating Christian's whereabouts, questioning Erica and Pedro separately. As Erica recounted her version of events, Mentioning the romantic relationship she now had with Christian, Pedro gave a story full of inconsistencies. The officers noticed that Pedro spoke about Christian in the past tense, raising the first alarms. According to Pedro, they had fought in his car, and after a physical altercation, he had left Christian on a street.
Things in his story just didn't seem to add up. He said that Christian asked to get out of the car, and he stopped and let him out. Then his story changed to he made him get out of the car because he was mad at him. Then it changed to he followed him out of the vehicle and they got into a fight.
I'll tell you because you're right, I can't keep everything from you, and I have to tell you one thing. Okay. Like in the scuffle with Chris, it wasn't just really an argument. I made the comment about the girl that he has a crush on, and he got angry at that. But then he came back with maybe you should just kill yourself. And that's when I turned around and punched him straight in the face.
But his story didn't convince the investigators, who found it strange that Pedro had no marks indicating a fight. As time passed, Pedro's story began to change. When confronted by the police, he eventually confessed that he had struck Christian, but insisted he had left him alive. Still, the officers knew something didn't add up. Pedro offered to take the police to the place where he had supposedly left Christian, but as the investigation progressed, his version of events continued to shift. The search for Christian intensified, with not only local police joining in, but also Christian's family, desperate to find their son. In the days following Christian's disappearance, authorities and volunteers began organizing thorough search parties in the areas surrounding the spot where Pedro claimed to have left his friend, beaten, but still alive. The Gainesville police spokesperson, along with Christian's parents, made public appearances, pleading with the community to assist in the search for the young man. Flyers with Christian's photo and description were distributed massively. A 19-year-old male, 5'8", 154 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. He was last seen wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. The family's plea did not go unheard. Quickly, dozens of people joined the search, and within days, there were hundreds, then thousands of volunteers willing to help. By early October, the FBI officially joined the investigation into the disappearance. As days passed, the Gainesville police began to uncover elements that contradicted Pedro's initial version of events, leading him to modify his story several times. In a search warrant of Pedro's home, investigators found a hidden backpack belonging to Christian, further intensifying suspicion. Pedro's vehicle was also confiscated and analyzed. Initial findings revealed limestone residues, an uncommon material in Gainesville, which redirected the search to areas where such material was prevalent. Even more alarming was the discovery of bloodstains in the car, later confirmed by lab analysis. Pedro, in one of his many accounts, admitted to having beaten Christian, leaving him bleeding, but still breathing. On September 24th, he was taken to court, charged with failing to provide medical assistance to his friend after the beating. At the hearing, broadcast via video conference, Pedro invoked the Fifth Amendment, choosing not to testify. The judge ordered him to be held without bail in the Alachua County Jail. From that point on, Pedro stopped cooperating with the authorities, who were convinced that he was the only person who knew where Christian was. Christian's parents, desperate, did everything they could to persuade Pedro to reveal what he had done with their son. Carlos, Christian's father, attempted to reach out to Pedro's parents, hoping they could intervene and convince him to tell the truth. Meanwhile, the search continued. Around 200 officers, including some from other jurisdictions, firefighters, and specialized rescue teams from Miami-Dade and Miramar, scoured rural areas on foot, horseback, all-terrain vehicles, helicopters, thermal imaging teams, and search dogs, some trained to locate bodies. Despite all efforts, there was still hope of finding Christian alive. The state governor, Rex Scott, also joined the efforts. Even a bus of 30 students from Doral Academy, where Christian, Pedro, and Erica had all graduated, arrived in the area to distribute flyers and assist with the search. Unfortunately, as the investigation progressed, hopes of finding Christian alive began to fade. In addition to the bloodstains found in Pedro's car, authorities conducted an audit of the accused's mobile phone, tracking its signal through cell towers. This revealed that on the afternoon of the disappearance, Pedro drove north and then east, stopping for about 2 hours in a rural area. When questioned about his activities in that area, Pedro gave an implausible answer, claiming to have picked up a homeless man with a long white beard, describing the man's clothing in detail but being unable to recall what Christian was wearing that day. The inconsistencies in his versions piled up, and surveillance footage from various avenues and establishments, as well as from his own home, revealed more contradictory details in his story. Pedro changed his version once again, stating that after the fight, he and Christian returned to the car, but Christian, enraged, got out of the vehicle and walked away. By this point, the police were almost certain that Christian was dead, likely at the hands of Pedro, although the key piece of evidence, the body, was still missing. The search efforts intensified, but fatigue was beginning to show. On October 13th, family members, friends, neighbors, and volunteers held simultaneous vigils in Gainesville, Miami, and Cali, Colombia, the Aguilar family's hometown, pleading for the young man's safe return. 5 days before the 1-month mark of Christian's disappearance, on October 15th, 2012, some prayers were partially answered. Hunters discovered human remains in Levy County, Florida, an hour's drive from Gainesville. The area where the remains were found belonged to a private hunting club. 2 of its members, while foraging for medicinal herbs, detected a strong odor of decomposition. Assuming it was a dead animal, they followed the smell and stumbled upon the body. The corpse, in an advanced state of decomposition, was buried in a shallow grave, with the hands, feet, and mouth bound with duct tape, a scene reminiscent of gang-related executions. A few meters from the body, investigators found sneakers and pants matching the description of what Christian had been wearing on the day he disappeared. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to the missing young man. Due to the condition of the body, the exact cause of death could not be determined, although strangulation was suspected, as no penetrating injuries were found. On September 28th, before the official confirmation of the remains' identity, Pedro was formally charged with first-degree murder. The discovery of Christian's body was a devastating blow to his family, who had held on to the hope of finding him alive. In the final week of October 2012, Christian's remains were finally laid to rest during a ceremony at St. Dominic Catholic Church. Around 500 people, family, friends, neighbors, and strangers who had joined the search gathered to bid him farewell. The coffin was escorted by police to Mercy Cemetery, where Christian was buried. On November 16th, Christian's family gathered at the site where his remains had been found to commemorate what would have been his 19th birthday. Meanwhile, prosecutors and investigators continued to gather evidence against Pedro. Forensic analysis revealed that Christian had not only died from the beating, but had also been sedated with a chemical compound before being asphyxiated. Authorities concluded that this was not an impulsive crime, but a premeditated murder. In addition to charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping, the prosecution added charges of evidence tampering, poisoning, providing false information to authorities, and improper transportation of a corpse. Pedro, meanwhile, was placed under suicide watch in jail after he confessed to his cellmate that he had thoughts of taking his own life. A letter allegedly written by Pedro was leaked, in which he expressed remorse, calling himself a monster for what he had done to Christian. The trial against Pedro began on August 4th, 2014, at the Alachua County Criminal Justice Center. Over the course of 2 weeks, the prosecution presented more than 450 physical pieces of evidence and 1,500 photographs, attempting to prove Pedro's guilt. The testimonies were especially revealing, with Erica Freeman standing out. She explained how Pedro had become possessive and controlling during their high school relationship. She also revealed that Pedro had moved to Gainesville in hopes of winning her back, but her rejection and his jealousy drove him to plan Christian's murder. Pages from Pedro's journal, read aloud during the trial, demonstrated his obsession with Erica and his desire to reunite with her. However, testimony and evidence revealed that Pedro had concocted a sinister plan, blinded by jealousy and frustration. Ultimately, the jury found him guilty on all counts, and Pedro was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After 9 days of hearings and 8 hours of closing arguments, on Friday, August 15th, 2014, the jury, composed of 8 women and 4 men, retired to deliberate. After just over 3 hours, they returned with a verdict. Pedro Andrés Bravo was found guilty of several charges: first-degree murder, unlawful detention, poisoning, evidence tampering, providing false information about the execution of a felony, giving false information related to a missing person, and illegal transportation of human remains. Pedro showed no reaction upon hearing the decision and remained calm throughout. Christian Aguilar's parents and family stood up, left the courtroom, crying and embracing each other outside. Justice had finally been served, bringing some relief to the pain of losing such a promising young man. On the other hand, Pedro's parents, with tears in their eyes, watched as the officers took their son's fingerprints. The prosecution and defense agreed to proceed immediately to the sentencing phase. After a short 15-minute recess, the hearing resumed for Judge James's ruling. Before the judge pronounced the sentence, Carlos Aguilar, Christian's father, gave an emotional statement on behalf of the family. "I cannot express how our lives were destroyed on September 20th by the acts of Mr. Bravo. I cannot quantify the pain we have endured." Pedro, before hearing the judge's final words, approached the stand and, with complete calm, reaffirmed his innocence. Ultimately, Judge James sentenced Pedro, who was 20 at the time, to life in prison without the possibility of parole for Christian's murder. Additionally, the judge added 40 more years for the other charges. Days later, in early September, Pedro's defense attorneys filed a motion for a new trial, claiming that the prosecutor, Bill Cervone, had communicated with the attorney of Miguel Angel, Pedro's cellmate, to obtain information about the location where Pedro had buried Christian's remains. According to the defense, the prosecutor used that information during the trial. However, Bill Cervone completely denied this version of events, stating that it was Miguel's attorney who had contacted him and provided the details. The motion for a new trial was rejected. In 2016, Pedro's legal representatives filed an appeal based on 3 points. First, the request for a new trial. Second, the court's refusal to suppress incriminating statements Pedro had made to authorities. And third, the use of his cell phone to determine his location on the day of the crime. This appeal also failed. Pedro Bravo, now 30 years old, remains incarcerated at the Taylor Correctional Institution. Following Christian's search, his family established the Christian Aguilar Foundation, aimed at helping parents of missing children cope with the painful process they had to endure. This foundation has collaborated with the Canine Search Organization, which specializes in breeding and training dogs for various activities, including finding missing persons. As for Erica, the young woman at the center of this tragedy, she graduated in 2017 with a degree in sustainability studies. She currently resides in Kissimmee, Florida, and since 2020 has worked as a donor and engagement administrator for the Heart of Florida United Way, an organization dedicated to advocating for education, health, and financial stability for everyone in Central Florida. Thank you so much for staying until the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing more content and reaching more people. If you liked the video, feel free to leave us a comment. See you next time.